Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah Chapter 1, Halacha 2. So there's a lot going on here. A lot of people will look at this and zoom by, get a few points, and then just keep moving. But actually, this is a short sugya and a short mishnah, but very rich in ideas and very rich in details. And actually, Rabbi Yochanan, who often in the Shas, the Yerushalmi Shas, mentions that he leaves pearls here and puzzles and riddles to sharpen our mind, has one at the end of this. The ending of this sugya will actually have such a riddle and a puzzle to sharpen the students' minds. And with careful eyes, you can see it, but most people will just zoom on by. So this is actually a really interesting set of ideas that's coming up, and let's start covering it with the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, we know that the first Mishnah in the chapter starts with this idea that Peah has no measure. And this Mishnah is going to come to modify that statement. The first Mishnah was really talking about this idea from a Doraita perspective, and this is going to be start talking about a D'Rabbanan perspective. So it says, one may not leave as Peah less than 1 out of 60 of the field, even though they said that Peah has no measure. So again, this is coming to talk about this difference between Doraita and D'Rabbanan. There is a proof in the Shas talking about 1/60th being in there as a proof, but it's still left as D'Rabbanan. The measure of 1/60th is only a minimum, and as we learned in the last Mishnah and Halacha and set of Halachas, in the last Halacha and Halacha 1, that it's when you start, once you start to cut, that's when Peah takes place. So we know that, one may not leave less than 1/60th, D'Rabbanan, but it is meritorious in all accounts to leave more than 1/60th. And sometimes it's not only meritorious, but the Mishnah is going to get into this idea of when it's even proper, when you really should be leaving more than a 60th. So when is this case? It all depends, says the Mishnah, on the largeness of your field, on the multitude of the poor, and on the multitude of the yield. So these three things are the conditions, but within them they have a lot of ideas. And I want to point to the Humash for a second. So in the Humash, the idea of Peah is mentioned either directly or hinted at 5 times in the Humash. It's saying of your field in the Humash, so that shows the idea of Eretz Yisrael, that these are agricultural laws of Eretz Yisrael. Of your field also has to do with ownership, and not just national ownership, but also the ownership of the individual, and that we know we have a principle that everything that is written next to one another in the Humash is somehow connected and related. And so in Kodashim, where Peah is mentioned, what is next to it, we have the laws for theft and honest weights and measures, and kindness. The kindness is next to honest weights and measures and not having theft. So Peah has these associated things that are placed next to it in the Torah, and this is going to be a framework for trying to understand this halacha, something that we have to keep in mind. So the Mishnah states, says the sugya, one may not leave less than 1 out of 60, And it depends on the largeness of the field, on the multitude of the poor, and on the multitude of the yield. So when we're talking about these multitudes, the size of the field, it has this idea that if the field is very, very large, and if the farmer is going to be reaping a very, very big harvest, then even if the number of poor people who are expected to come and collect payahs is very small, the owner is urged to leave more than a 60th because he can easily afford to do so. We're going to be getting into this idea of the benefits and rights of the person collecting payah and the benefits and the rights of the person farming and triggering the payah obligation. So in the Mishnah and in the eyes of the oral law, it's saying in the largeness of the field, even if there's not a lot of people who are poor, that you should be generous and that it's a form of kindness and that you should make sure that everybody's leaving with something that's meaningful. The sugya is going to go on and start to explain what that is. We have the second idea of the multitude of poor. So even if the field is an average size, but the number of poor who are expected to come and collect payah is very, very large, such that each collector will end up getting a small amount of payah. It is proper for the farmer to leave more than a 60th, so that each poor person can return home with a respectable amount. Certainly, the payah can be used to make challah. The payah can be used for necessary things to help keep the poorest Jews in the world alive, maybe the oldest and least able to go and work in a normal way, to help keep them alive. So it's to help really satisfy the basic needs of the poorest. As an aside, payah does not have any sanctity. It's an obligation in the Torah, but it doesn't have sanctity like Trumos and Meiser does. And when you collect payah, you're not obligated for tithes from the payah. So then you have the third idea here, which is the multitude of the yield. And very important, the Mishnah uses the word with a vav, anavah, but we will see later that it could be spelt with a bet, anavah, so that it could mean the kernel, the quality of the kernel. And the Vilna Gaon is going to discuss that a little bit later. So we have in here, depending on the way it's presented with either a vav or a bet, that it could either be the size of the field, so that it's talking about a case where both the size of the field and the number of poor are average. And in that case, if the farmer is blessed with a larger than average yield, then it's proper to leave more than a 60th. But if you're vowelizing it with a vav, so that it means kernel, then a different set of halachas will come in place, because what that means is that the quality of the yield is different. So in one patch, maybe the wheat is a little bit better, and on another patch, the wheat is a lower quality, and then it goes back to a higher quality. So then there's going to be a different set of rules. It's not exactly going to be a 60th, because if you just leave a 60th from the lower quality, it's not the same as if you blended that with a 60th from these different quality kernels. So the Gemara cares about that. So the sugya says it was taught in a brisa, we do not say to the poor man, bring camels and load onto them your payah. In other words, one should not leave so much payah that the poor will come to collect it and need camels to transport it home. We know that payah is exempt from Meiser, and consequently, there's an issue with that, because the more peah you're leaving, the more you're taking away from Meiser, and you're taking away something that is exempted. So yeah, you are encouraged to leave more than a 60th, but you have to keep in mind that if you go crazy with it, that you're taking away from tithes. This idea about the camel is an important point with regards to the tithes. For when the truma is at the grinding area, it's up for the Kohen to come and collect it. It's not the obligation for the person who owns it to come and bring it to the Kohen. And it's the same thing with peah, and that's why it's coming to point out at the start of this, bringing camels, because it's the obligation of the poor person to come and collect it. The person who's farming it does not have the obligation under normal circumstances to go and find out the poor person and go bring it to him. If there's cases later about maybe rain is going to come and ruin the field or something like that, he can bring it to the charity, the communal charity box to distribute. But again, this is pointing out the idea that it's the poor man who comes to collect it. It's not on the obligation for the farmer to come and collect it and bring the peah to the poor person. Important halacha, point in halacha. So the Gemara is going to qualify the ruling, and the Brisa is going to refer to where the owner leaves more than a minimum measure of a 60th. Like this is a case where the field is very, very large, or the number of poor people is very, very large, or the harvest is especially bountiful and rich. So the sugya says, but where he leaves just the minimum measure of a 60th, we do tell him bring camels and load. So we have this other idea here with peah, and like with other charity, that the 1/60th is really the absolute minimum. The Rabbanan is really the absolute minimum one may leave as peah. But the farmer must leave out that point, must leave that out. You have to leave out the 60th. And what the sugya is trying to teach you is that even if you know that the peah is going to go to one person in the village, and that 1/60th ends up being a large monetary amount, that you're required to leave it. Normally, you're not required to make a poor person rich. The Torah commands you to sustain them, but not to make them rich. And this is a case where the sugya is trying to teach you and point out that, yeah, you're not supposed to make them rich, but with regards to peah, if you're in a type of case where there's only one person in the town who's going to be collecting peah, and that 1/60th is very, very large, and he's going to all the other fields and collecting, and it's very, very large, and he's going to make a lot of money out of it, and he's got to bring camels to load it, and you see him bringing the camels to come and load it, and you say, wow, 1/60th, look at how much he's getting. You're still required to leave peah. You're not allowed to leave less than 1/60th. That's what it's coming to teach. So the Mishnah is going to state that it all depends on the largeness of the field. And the Brisa is going to discuss the amount one should leave as peah. It says, if his field is large and the poor are few, he gives according to the size of the field. In other words, he gives more than 1/60th. And the Yefei Marah points out that although the number of poor means that even if he leaves just a 60th, each poor person will take home a respectable amount of peah. Nevertheless, since he has a large field, he can afford to leave more than a 60th, and he should do so. So the sugya continues, and it says, if his field is small and the poor are many, he gives according to the number of poor, In other words, he gives more than a 60th. So the commentary here by the Pnei Moshe is that although the fact that his field is small means that leaving more than a 60th will financially strain him, he should still do so that each person who collects will receive a respectable amount of peah. In other words, this oral teaching is coming to teach us that we do care about the dignity. Why? Because it's going to be coming up later in peah that we don't want to waste the poor person's time. The poor person, instead of doing some other financial activity to help sustain himself, is going to spend that time. Maybe they're old, maybe that journey to the field means a lot because they have arthritis and they struggle to get to that field. And after all that struggle to come up there, you don't want to leave this poor person with arthritis who really struggle to come there with something that's very meager and demoralizing. So that you have to be sensitive. And that's what the sugya is trying to teach us. Now there's going to come to be a pearl, and it's going to come to look like a malochet, and we're going to give everybody a puzzle to think about and a riddle to think about to help to sharpen our minds. And here it starts to come. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, interprets both factors, the size of the field and the number of poor, to benefit the owner. In other words, the brisa here is going to have this contrast between the opinion of the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and it's going to look like there's a contradiction. So the Tanna Kama is interpreting both factors, in other words, the size of the field and the number of the poor, to favor the poor. In other words, that really you got to help out the poor and you got to favor the poor. And so they're seeing the peah obligation as favoring the poor. You have to favor the poor. So they're saying that they're saying that if there's other factors for leaving more than a 60th, that's what should be done. In other words, that these other factors should be taken into account, and because of that, it's going to favor the poor people. Shimon Bar Yochai, by contrast, is going to interpret these two factors in favor of the owner. And according to Shimon Bar Yochai, he's going to say that if these other factors are there for leaving the minimum of a 60th, we do not urge the owner to leave more. So the brisa is going to present the opinion now of Shimon Bar Yochai, and here's how it goes. It says, if the field is large and the poor are few, he gives according to the number of poor. In other words, he gives a 60th. So in other words, although he owns a large field and he could afford to leave more, Shimon Bar Yochai is saying that since the number of poor is small, and each collector will still get a respectable amount, even if the farmer just leaves a 60th, he does not need to leave more. And the next part of the verse, of this condition, is as follows. According to Shimon Bar Yochai, it says, if his field is small and the poor are many, he gives according to the size of his field, a 60th. So here Shimon Bar Yochai is saying that if both the size of the field and the number of poor are great, even Shimon Bar Yochai would agree that he should leave more than a 60th. But in this case, where the field is small and the poor are many, that he leaves just a 60th. And he's saying that each of the poor who come to the collect will receive a meager amount, a very small amount, and he does not need to leave them more, since leaving more in a small field is going to be financially hard on him. And so that's how Shimon Bar Yochai is saying that we favor the owner. So the Mishnah the Gemara, the sugya points out the Mishnah does not say so. It does not subscribe to Shimon Bar Yochai's opinion. Rather, it all depends on the largeness of the field, on the multitude of the poor, and on the multitude of the yield. In other words, the fact that the Mishnah says it depends on the largeness of the field rather than just on the field indicates that the Mishnah means to enumerate factors which benefit the poor rather than the owner. And that's the idea that the Mara Fulda points out here. In other words, he's saying that it all depends on the multitude of the poor and the multitude of the yield. And the Gemara says the Mara Fulda, the Gemara's inference is not only from the first phrase of the Mishnah, but rather from all three phrases of the Mishnah. And that's how it should be read, says the Mara Fulda. So, how could it be that Shimon Bar Yochai is so wrong on this? And I'll give you a hint. There's a sugya from a dispute in Peah Chapter 6, Halacha 1, which will help us to understand what's going on here. So, why don't you think about it for a second, and let's look at this puzzle. How could it be? Everybody knows the halacha is by the Tanna Kama. We all know that. Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan knows that. Rabbi Yochanan knows that we all know that the halacha is going to be like the Tanna Kama. So he still puts in this brisa by Shimon Bar Yochai. So what does Shimon Bar Yochai mean? In other words, could it be that Shimon Bar Yochai is so wrong? Of course not. So what's going on where Shimon Bar Yochai could be right? What condition could it be where Shimon Bar Yochai is right? In other words, this is not so cut and dry of, hey, Tanna Kama say like this, Shimon Bar Yochai says like that, time to move on. Let's go on to Halacha 3. That's not really what's going on here. It's very common in the Yerushalmi style that there's really more going on. And in fact, you're going to see when you figure out this riddle that actually Shimon Bar Yochai is right on the halacha. But what's the condition? In what circumstance is Shimon Bar Yochai right? So can you figure out in what circumstance Shimon Bar Yochai would be right? And that really would be the halacha? Anybody have any idea? So let me explain under what circumstance. By the way, again, if you look at Peah Chapter 6, Halacha 1, you'll see, as a hint, you'll see the circumstance. So here's the condition. The condition where it's going to be by the owner is as follows. Here's the answer to this great riddle that they put in here for us. So it goes like this. We know that the 1/60th is D'Rabbanan, and we know that Peah is in your land. And in the case of what's talking about in Peah, it's talking about the conquest of the land of Syria. There's a dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir about what is the status of land for tithing in Syria. And I think this is what Shimon Bar Yochai is talking about. He's basically saying that the halacha would benefit the owner since the 1/60th is D'Rabbanan. And since there's a big question about what would be the halachic status of land and fields in Syria from that conquest. So I think what Shimon Bar Yochai is pointing out that the halacha would be like this for those lands of conquest, whether it was a national conquest or not from King David. And so I think what Shimon Bar Yochai is saying and what the Tanna Kama are saying that this is the halacha inside of Eretz Yisrael proper, what we know was part of the conquest. And the law would be like Shimon Bar Yochai in the lands of Syria. And so in this way, there's really no malochet at all. It looks like there's a dispute, but they're actually pointing out two different conditions, and that actually comes up a lot of times in the Yerushalmi. It'll look like it's talking about something in Eretz Yisrael for both cases, and it's not. In one case, it'll be talking about the law for Eretz Yisrael. And in another case, it'll be talking about a law from outside Eretz Yisrael. And that's what's happening here. Shimon Bar Yochai is actually describing what the halacha would be in Syria, since this is something that's d'Rabbanan. And this is the law, says the Tanna Kama, of Eretz Yisrael. So in fact, there's really not a dispute at all. So there's a few notes that I want to bring up from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, who writes a lot about this, wants to point out that there's a variant reading in Chulin 137b that's gonna point out that the rabbinic lower limit was instituted only for fields outside of the land of Israel. That would be like in Syria. But inside the land of Israel, the original law of Peah has no limits and at all, and they remain in force. And another point I want to point out is that the Rambam is going to explain the Mishnah to mean that a larger than normal field calls for a greater than 1/60th pay of allotment, and assuming Rambam's view on the commentary to be consistent with the view he expresses in Hilchos Matanos Anayim, it's going to follow that he explained the Mishnah to mean both things, that the farmer should increase his pay allotment according to the largeness or smallness of the field, and if the 1/60th minimum is insignificant either for the farmer or the poor person, the pay allotment should be increased accordingly. That's how the Rambam is reading it. And this idea in the Rambam and in the Vilna Gaon is coming up, where if you're going to vowelize it with the anava being with a bet, or the anava being with a vav, in other words, one reading being kernel and the other reading being yield, it means one thing. So in other words, if it's going to be with the yield, it's going to be what we talked about with increasing the amount. But if it's going to be with the bet, then it means that we have to look at the quality of the kernel. And so if there's an area in the field where part of the area has a very high quality and part of the area has a very low quality, then you're supposed to leave a total of 1/60th, but you're supposed to do from here and there. So in other words, you're supposed to take so that you would add it up so that in total it's going to be 1/60th, but you're going to leave over from part of that amount from the good area and part of the amount from the bad area, so that the owner doesn't end up losing anything, and the poor person doesn't end up losing anything, and so it's going to end up getting split. The Rashash, when he talks about this idea of anava from the Mishnah, he's gonna use it in the sense of referring to poverty, and he's saying that the farmer should increase his pay allotment according to the degree of poverty afflicting the poor people in the area. In other words, he's reading this as saying that if the poor are really poor, you should leave more. And if the poor are they're poor, but they're not so poor, and they're not really in need of sustenance, so you can adjust it. You still have to leave the 60th, but you shouldn't be as concerned. So that's a very interesting and deep reading of the Rashash. So I think that's going to conclude for. One more thing about this is that we have to look at this in this other degree in terms of humility and the humility of the owner. Since the final phrase is talking about the humility of the owner. Um, it could be explained as being stated in favor of the poor, um, but in other words, the Pnei Moshe is saying that we should view the giving of Peah and the amount as being connected to the owner of the field's humility and consideration of the poor according to the number of poor and according to the size of the field. Um, and it may also mean that we should try to favor the poor. In other words, the Pnei Moshe here is looking at this idea of humility here with the giving of the poor, um, in terms of trying to favor the poor. That this is a connection of kindness and also of human character for the owner of the field. So I'll bet you never thought there was so much on Peah Chapter 1, Halacha 2, but there's actually a lot of ideas going on in here, and it's actually a lot more complex than you would think. Anyway, have a great day, and tomorrow we will do Peah Chapter 1, Halacha 3.